Lee Cranmer, here he is. He's really full now from eating a good meal. He's not going to be able to say anything. You can fall asleep, right?
I hope not.
Standing up, okay. So Lee spent most of his career working as the historic archaeologist with the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, and he's got a bachelor's in science from Stockton University and a BA in anthropology and an MA in history from the University of Maine. Been doing archaeology for 30 years or so, and about 20 years with the state, right?
Yeah,
And Lee's worked with us over the years on a number of properties we've protected where at any time there's a land for Maine's future money going into protecting a project or a property, there's a requirement that there be a basic archaeology survey, a phase 1 survey. And we've worked extensively with Lee and with his colleague Art Speece over the years in doing that on a number of properties. And then we have worked with Lee since his retirement over at Twings Point, as I mentioned before, in Woolwich. So, thank you very much for coming down. And
thank you for inviting me.
I'm going to give you this to clip on so that this will be recording onto the camera. Just stick it on here somewhere.
Okay.
There we go. All right. And then,
I better use this, or you won't be able to hear me.
do you need water?
Good.
Do you need water or anything?
I got it.
Okay.
Do we want to turn the lights down? I don't know.
Play with that a little bit. I'd like to keep the light on you if possible so you can show up on the camera. But let me
Okay, whatever.
do here.
So, after a nice meal, we'll be talking about privies. Before we start, every once in a while, somebody asks me, what is a privy? So just to be sure we're all on the same page, that's a privy. So what I'll be talking about is a history of 3 sites where the privies contain a significant archaeological data. I'll be talking about the archaeology of these 3 privies, the history of those sites, and show the artifacts that were found in the privies, and from that make a determination as to when they were filled in and by whom. And the sites are mid-18th century frontier fort, that's Fort Halifax in Winslow, 18th to 20th century farmstead, that's in Topsham. It was the Parrington House that was moved when they built the new bridge from Topsham to Cook's Corner or Brunswick. And a mid 19th to 20th century urban house in Portland. So we'll start with the oldest, Fort Halifax, and it starts with the resettlement of the Kennebec region. The Kennebec proprietors owned a large area of the Kennebec, as you probably all know, 15 miles on either side of the Kennebec. Here is a map that was drawn up for the proprietors showing the Kennebec. The proprietors wanted to bring settlers into the area so they could make money off of them, sell them land, build sawmills, sell them wood, and so forth. So they built Fort Frankfurt in Dresden in 1752. Fort Frankfurt was later renamed Fort Shirley, and it's now the site of the Pommel Courthouse. That didn't work. They didn't get a lot of settlers coming in because this was after a peace treaty of 1713, and some places started getting settled, but up here, further up on the Kennebec, they were still afraid of Indians, so they didn't come in. So the proprietors built Fort Western in Augusta in 1754 as a supply base for Fort Halifax. Massachusetts built Fort Halifax at Taconic, which is Winslow, also in 1754, to supposedly protect against a French and Indian attack on New England and assure local settlers that it was safe. The governor of Massachusetts, Governor Shirley, who Fort Frankfort was later renamed for, was instrumental in getting Fort Halifax built. And then after that was done, he got some stock with the Kennebec proprietors. So it wasn't purely protection. So Fort Halifax, built in 1754 by Massachusetts. It was never attacked, but at least on 3 occasions, troops going to the fort from Fort Western or working outside the fort were attacked, and some were killed. It was decommissioned in 1767. Archaeology started after April 1st, 1987. This is the remaining structure of Fort Halifax, the southwest blockhouse. And on April 1st, 87, the waters rose up to the 2nd floor, lifted the blockhouse up, and as it floated down the river, it broke apart. And bits and pieces, I shouldn't say bits and pieces, timbers of it were found all along the river and out to some of the offshore islands. This is where the fort had stood. Well, the blockhouse had stood right there. The smoke you see is the burning debris from the flood. That whole point was a park, and it's covered with trees. As you can see, most of those trees are gone. So, as the pieces of the fort resurfaced, it was decided to reconstruct it and rebuild it. But before they could do that, they had to determine that the fort was on its original location, because they were going to anchor the fort down to bedrock. And some people said that the fort had been out on that point. Some said it had been up on a hill on the other side of the road, and some said it hadn't been there at all. So we went in 87 and did a 2-week survey and determined that the blockhouse was on its original location. But the town developed an appreciation for what they had lost. So through various means of funding, we kept coming back over the years from 87 to 88. Actually, we came back in 88 because we had to do a major prehistoric survey. Because when we did the 87 dig, we found prehistoric occupation going down at least 5 feet. And it was later determined it went back over 3,000 years. So we came back in 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 94, and 95. This is the 89 dig. And I put this in here so you could see the blockhouse had been rebuilt. The dark timbers were the original, well, at least the ones that were there before the flood, and the lighter timbers were new ones. Wow, looks better there. This is the plan of the fort. Don't worry about the Star Fort. That was originally built in 54, and then the commander who came in to take over, Commander Lithgow, built this fort. The southwest blockhouse, the red one, is the one that's still standing. And what we're interested in is that working? Yeah, up in this area, off of the northeast blockhouse. We excavated there in 94 and 95. And almost all the work was outside the fort. And this is what we found. There was a 17th century site here as well. A trading post that was built around 1650, 51. Somewhere around there. And these diagonal lines you see are part of that trading post and the palisade that surrounded it. But what we're interested in is this feature here. Again, outside the fort, the blockhouse is this square down here, the northeast blockhouse. This line would have been where a gate was. Everything out here is outside the fort. And what we found was a feature. A feature is an artifact that you can't easily pick up and take back to the lab. It could be a post hole, it could be a rock wall, something that is a disturbance by humans. What we want to look at is not feature 121. That is, on that point of land they had built a railroad spur. And on either side of the railroad spur was industry. And that feature 121 is part of a platform for a loading dock. It's a support for that loading dock. What we're interested in is this feature outside. I never changed that. Here, this lighter soil is feature 124. And this is feature 124 after it was excavated. It proved to be a wood-lined privy, 3x5. Actually, we hadn't finished the whole thing. As you can see, up on this wall, that still had to be excavated. But we figure it was roughly 3x5. It was 4.5 feet below the colonial surface and contained over 4,000 artifacts. So now we'll look at those. Well, you know what these are. There were women at the fort. Lithgow's wife was there and other women, but that doesn't, the pins and scissors and thimbles don't necessarily indicate presence of women, because soldiers had to know how to tend to their own clothing, repair their own clothing. We found porcelain. You can see 136 shards, at least 19 individual pieces, and at least 5 different patterns. These are tea bowls. This is all Chinese export porcelain. More porcelain and some, they look around? Yeah, good. Saucers. This is an interesting piece. I'm sorry, this screen I'm looking at here has the picture elongated and it just kind of throws me off. This is porcelain, but the pattern is of Delft, or Delft ware, faience, or Mahalica, whatever you want to call it, or Majolica. That's a Delft pattern. And also, if you look around the edge, it's white, very white like this piece, but the rest of the plate is kind of off-white, same as Delft. So after a lot of talking to people and research, we figured that what this is people in England would send over a plate or something with a ship's captain to China to have a set made or to have one piece replaced, whatever, and 3 years later they'd get it back. And this appears that someone sent over a Delft plate and said, I want a set of these, or I want one of these in porcelain. And the Chinese craftsmen not only reproduced the design, but they also reproduced that off-white color that Delft has. And speaking of Delft, a chamber pot and a plate, Delft plate. These are neat pieces, especially that top one. These are both English white salt glaze. The top one is interesting because, if anybody has any questions while I'm going on here, just let me know. The top one is over-glazed polychrome. That is, they paint it over the glaze with different colors. And when you find this in the ground, usually the color is gone. The design is gone. You can see a few spots where it is already getting dim and faded, like over in here. But nonetheless, that's a really nice piece. And then at the bottom is a tea bowl. Jackfield teapot and part of a bowl.
What do you mean by jackfield?
Jackfield, it's a stoneware, but it started out life as a redware, and it was very high fired. Fired so high that it turned it into a stoneware. And the red paste is generally purple from being fired so high. And it's very hard. And you can see the dates of it.
Could you just clarify, you threw your broken china down the privy?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Case bottles. These were some of the first types of bottles that came to the colonies. They're called case bottles because they were square and you could fit them into a case for shipment. And as you can see, these are composed of dozens and dozens of pieces each because they were all broken up in the privy. So it took a guy most of a winter to put them together. One of those case bottles, the one in the center is a large mouth case bottle. Could have been used for something dry like tobacco or whatever. And then they put a cover over it and tie it down with string. And the one on the right is a French case bottle. And wine bottles, the small one is called it's probably called a quarter bottle. They had half bottles and quarter bottles, and they would be for more expensive liquids. A perfume bottle, which is very much like one that was found at Strawberry Bank in Portsmouth. And this, they did use these for bottles, pharmaceutical bottles, but we found several of them and they were used for sandglasses. We know they had sandglasses because Fort Western has the records of when they were ordered from Boston. So, who filled in the privy and when? I think it was filled in when the fort was decommissioned in 1767. The troops were told to clean up the place and before they left, and they threw everything in the privy. I think there's another privy nearby, but it hasn't been excavated yet. So we'll move on to the Parrington House.
I have a question.
Yes.
What was the prehistoric things that you found at that site?
As Fort Halifax, just about everything. We got pottery, tools, a lot of flakes. We found hearths, that is fire pits. I don't have a, well, that's on another slideshow, but that point of land was made of alluvial deposits, all sand that was brought in by flooding episodes. And in between the flooding, you can see dark bands of where the Native Americans had settled and had lived for some time before another episode of flooding came. And we found these on down to, the furthest we could go was about 5 feet because of OSHA regulations. But we went down to 5 feet and we dated these bands where we found charcoal, dated it back to 30, I think it's 3,300 years ago. And I think they probably go back further if you go. This was where the southwest blockhouse was. If you go more towards the center of that point of land, I think you could go deeper.
Did you find tools?
Yes. Blades, projectile points, drills, little hand drills, just about everything you'd expect to find. A lot of prehistoric material, which hasn't been written up yet, but hopefully somebody will write it up. I'm writing up Fort Halifax, and it should be published soon. But it's not going to include the prehistoric,
Thank you.
because I'm not a prehistoric archaeologist and don't want to get involved in it. So the Parrington House, and like I said, it was where the bridge is now, right next to the railroad, just beyond the trees. And this picture is the railroad line that's still there. It was first built in 1761 as a garrison house and purchased by James Parrington in 75. Now this is kind of boring, but it's important. His son was married and supposedly built the existing house that you see and vaguely see in the picture. James dies in 1832. Ezekiel dies and leaves the estate to his wife, Isabella, and then after her death it would revert to Colin, or Israel Colin Parrington, on the death of his mother. And in 1863, Colin marries, and Isabella dies in 79. And the homestead remained in the Parrington family until 1936, when it was sold to Mr. Wilson. And Wilson sold it to the state in 89 for this project, this new bridge. This is the work we did at the Parrington House. One thing we found was this. This was the garrison house that was built by Gore in 61. And then the main house was built in 1810. What they did was they took that garrison house and moved it and made it part of the main house. We know this because architectural historians went into the house after the state bought it to determine exactly how old it was and if it was worth, it was worth being put on the National Register, which it was. And that the house was eventually moved to another piece of the property to make way for the bridge. So we found that. But getting back to the privies, we found a privy here. This was the privy was on the inside, and the chamber, I guess you'd say, was on the outside of the house, so they could clean it out from the outside. This area was, that's still there. That was the woodshed. So it's big house, little house. Back house was the woodshed, and then the barn was not attached. In that privy, the only thing we found on the bottom of it was a porcelain teacup. And on the bottom of the teacup it said made in Nippon, or just said Nippon. In 1883, in the Kinley Tariff Act, said you had to have the origin of goods that were being shipped to the United States, what country they were made in. And I think, I'm not sure of the date, but I think it's 1911, the U.S. said that Nippon was not a country. Nippon was what the Japanese interpreted when somebody said Japan. So it's not what they called their country. So the U.S., after this date, 1911 or whatever it was, the U.S. said you have to have Japan, made in Japan on it, not made in Nippon. So anyhow, the teacup dates between 1883 and 1911, which doesn't really have anything to do with when it was deposited in the privy. But I just thought that was interesting. Whoops. We found another privy up here, and that was empty. And the privy we're interested in was there. This is it. Feature 33 was the privy itself. And feature 34, A, B, C, and D were posts shallowly set in the ground to support the building. This is picture of the excavation in progress, the floor of the privy, or the floor of the pit. And you can see bits and pieces of different types of ceramic, some redware up there, and whatever these are, I'm not sure. This looks like yellowware. But anyhow, here's the privy. On the left side is mostly excavated. We did eventually excavate the whole thing, the rest of it. And on the right side you can see the blocks that had supported the privy. They were excavated and the privy's excavated. So the privy contained over 2,000 artifacts. 31 complete ceramic vessels. 5 redware, complete ceramic redware vessels. 11 creamware. We hadn't discussed creamware. Creamware came in 1762. It was invented by Wedgwood. And the Fort Halifax site, there was no creamware. So it was all fort-related material. And then pearlware, also invented by Wedgwood, came in and eventually replaced creamware. And 1 bottle. These are the redwares. Redwares were some of the first ceramics that came to the country, and they were utilitarian wares. And we still have them today in the form of flower pots and other redware ceramics. The 2 in the back are milk pails, and the other 3 are just utilitarian vessels.
Were they redder at one point, Lee, or is that just a lot of variation in the clay that was used?
They're glazed. They have a lead glaze. The one in the front right is red. It doesn't have any glaze on it, either inside or out. Actually, it did have glaze. You can see some of the. Sorry, you can see some of the glaze here, but most of the glaze is gone off of that. So you can see the red paste. You can see the red paste on the one in the center. The other 3 I've brown lead glaze, or clear lead glaze probably.
Did a lot of people die of lead poisoning at that time?
I don't know. You would think so, because everything had lead glaze on it practically. But they didn't, if somebody died, they wouldn't know that it was from lead poisoning. This is creamware. Again, 1762. It's pretty much very plain. It's all creamy. The pieces up in the back are discolored because of being buried. But they're all complete, pretty much. And there's one of them has a little rim of decoration around it, or a couple of them, but nothing much. Creamwares were generally pretty boring. Creamware chamber pot. These are the pearlwares. Again, all these complete pieces from the privy. Most of them are transfer printed. They would take something like a paper doily and put a glaze on it, not a glaze, an ink on it, press that on the paste of the plate or whatever they were making, and lift it off, and you'd have this transfer printed design. There's a couple of them. Stop it. This one here, and this one, no, that one. That's called flow blue. That's when they saturated that doily with a lot of ink, and it just almost smeared the design. One down the bottom here is green shell edge, and this one up here is hand painted, and then an engine turned, engine decorated bowl there. And that's one of the pearlware platters. So who filled in the privy? and when. Colin was married in 1863, brought his new wife home to mother. The wife cleans out the mother's old dishes. Or when the mother died in 1879, the wife got new dishes. But they all, the date of the ceramics all correspond to that period.
Wait,
Yes.
would they select an abandoned one, an abandoned privy, or to put that in, probably, you know?
Yeah.
Not one of the first ones, right?
They would say that this one's too far from the house,
So
we don't
let's
need
use
it.
that one.
And maybe that's when they built the one up behind the house. And like I said, we found 3, so they kept moving them around, depending on what activity was going on in their dooryard. Okay, now we'll go to Portland. This is a picture of Brown Street around 1865 or 1870.
North or south of Commerce Street?
It's west, or is it? See which? I'm not. I'll show you. There'll be other pictures where you'll know right where it is. Like this one. This is a map drawn by Anne Longfellow Pierce, the sister of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, in 1825, and it shows the Longfellow House. Well, it shows Congress Street across the bottom, Brown Street, where is this? Up here, and the Longfellow House is over here. This is another plan, 1838, of the Longfellow House, and what we're interested in is this quarry. Again, Brown Street is off this edge of the map, and Congress Street is at the bottom. I'm not sure which way it's running. Okay. So, the house was built in 1850 or 52. Corey owned the property. He lived across the street with his mother, and in 1850 or 52 he built this house. He had a dry goods business in Portland and was probably fairly successful, since he could build one house and get rid of another. He sold the house on Brown Street in 74. There was a series of owners and tenants that followed. In 1920, the house was vacant and purchased and turned into apartments in 1924. And there's some pictures of that. This shows the apartments, which are here. That's one, and there's one here, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this picture also shows this house, which is probably what 47 Brown Street looked like before it was modernized in 24. These are the more modern buildings that were, the apartment buildings that were built. Or one was modernized, the small one was built, had been a vacant lot. Okay, this is a 1886 Sanborn Atlas Map. And it shows 47 Brown Street, where the star is. It also shows that, WC, for water closet, or privy. And here is the Longfellow House. Again, this is Sanborn Atlas 1946. And it shows the 2 apartment buildings. You can notice that the outhouse is gone. I wasn't real successful in finding out when they brought sewers into this area of Portland, but it was around the 1920s. And here is the Maine Historical Society. They've expanded it from just the Longfellow House to a library. So, I think it was around 2007, 2006, around in there. The Historical Society wanted to build a vault. The apartment buildings were gone. These were gone. This was a park. The whole thing was a parking lot. And the Historical Society wanted to build a vault here to hold their records. Underground, temperature-controlled, humidity-controlled vault. So they started construction without any previous or prior consideration of archaeology. So they tore a privy in half, and you can see some of it lying out there. The other half had been carted away, and then the construction workers had looted it, and the people who worked for Historical Society had picked through it. And then somebody finally said, well, maybe we ought to call in the state archaeologist and have them look at this. So this was on a Friday, and I was working in that area, so I went and told them I could do it in a couple days. And then came in Monday, some more stuff was missing. But anyhow, here we are. This is a guy that worked with me. It still does occasionally. Here, and the other guy is Norm Buttrick, a retired Freeport high school teacher who is also an archaeologist. So we're cleaning up the mess that was made, and it's almost all cleaned up, and we're ready to start excavating the rest of the privy. And this is a view of excavating that privy, and these are the way they were found. And that's the privy excavated.
This was like 70 days?
2 days.
No, what day, what year?
Oh, I think it was 07, 06, around in there. I don't remember exactly.
2000?
Yeah.
So privies were just used as dumps, kind of. Just dumped stuff.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
I find it hard to believe that the Portland Planning Board, I mean, I've worked with planning boards all over the place, but why, they didn't require a sign-off from the,
It was
they
the
make you jump through a lot of hoops.
it was the Maine Historical Society.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't think they would do anything
Right,
to
exactly. So,
destroy a historical site.
The Historical Society.
I know. Yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
okay, go on.
No, after I was done with the report, I spent a lot of time on the report. It was very interesting. I had, I don't know, 4 or 5 boxes of artifacts. He said, the artifacts are yours. When do you want them? I don't know how many years went by. And they got a new director, and the director finally agreed to take the artifacts. They were making a display area, and I mentioned, I said, wow, this, you could use a little bit of this to show what was happening on Brown Street. So some of the artifacts, some neat artifacts. No, they weren't interested. So anyhow, I got over 4,000 artifacts from the half of the privy that was left. A lot of glass. 52 bottles at least. A lot of ceramics, 69 vessels, different ceramic vessels. Some bones, and plus some other stuff. So a lot of olive oil bottles. Very interesting. You can see this, can you see, that big kick-up in there. That's called the kick-up. And like on a wine bottle, it has the thing. But this is very unusual shape. So we got quite a few of these. Another different type of olive oil bottle. Again, it's got that big kick up on the bottom, and it says that it's from France, French olive oil. I don't know if they were cooking with a lot of olive oil. They also used olive oil for lamps. So they, I don't know what they were using it for.
What was that middle section for, that you called the hiccup?
Kick up. It's you see it on wine bottles where the bottom is got a depression in it.
Why?
That's a good question. I think they argue about why, whether it has to do with sediment in the wine or for one thing, when you're making the bottle, you're making the bottle from the neck and the mouth, and you've got a blowpipe attached to that. So then you take another a blowpipe or some type of a tool and stick it up the back end of the bottle and form that kick up, and then you break the blowpipe on the front off and finish the rim and the neck and the lip. It could just be because of the way it was made, the way they made them.
The kick-up also allows the bottle to withstand a much higher internal pressure. You see that in champagne bottles, for example.
Yeah.
Modern welding gas cylinders have a kick-up in the bottom, because if it was flat, when it's under 2,000 pounds or more of pressure, it could bow that out. So
That's neat. Okay.
Usually your higher pressure vessels will have a bigger kick-up.
Good to know. Thank you. Okay. Other bottles. Lots of bottles. Sauce bottle. Sarsaparilla bottle. Bitters bottles. Medicinal bottles.
What is this in the bottle?
It's it's for whatever ails you type thing.
Was it bitters? Because it, yeah, would it be bitter taste?
I don't think so. I think it was just called that. But as far as I know, it was like the snake oil salesman out in the West selling bitters.
I think it was probably quite bitter. Yeah, it is bitter. Yeah, I think it was bitter.
Bitter? Okay.
Bitter drops, yeah.
Perfume bottles, wine bottles, and oil lamp globe and chimney. We got a lot of shell edge pearlware. We got 10 different designs, shell edge designs. And if you count these, there's only 8 of them there. The other 2 were too small and they couldn't fit them in the picture properly. Some more transfer print. This is black transfer print. This is neat. It's a child's mug, and it's taken out of Franklin's Poor Richard Almanac, and it basically tells kids if you don't go to school, you'll wind up in jail. A nice hand-painted pearlware bowl with lid. And these are engine decorated pearlware mugs. And whiteware. Whiteware came in about 1820. It took a little while for it to become popular, but it replaced everything else, practically everything else eventually. And whiteware is most of what we have today. And these are all supposed to be white, but again, being in the ground, they got stained. And this is yellowware. Came in right after whiteware. It's also hard. Whiteware is hard ceramic compared to pearlware and creamware. And yellowware is also similar to whiteware. And the decoration, the blue and white decoration, is called mocha. And clay tobacco pipes. They were found on all the sites, but there was quite a few of them here. Buttons. The top, the white buttons are all glass, and then down the bottom there's a mixture, a couple bone buttons, I think a wood button, brass, and a couple glass buttons. A writing slate and slate pencils. You can see on one edge up here is numbers, and unfortunately it was probably all in there, but the rest of it got carted away. Whoops. Nice marble, rather expensive to collectors right now, from Germany. And bones. This is a passenger pigeon, and some of the bones we got were from passenger pigeons. This is Martha, and she was the last known passenger pigeon, and she died in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1914. So, who filled in the privy and when? The bottles all date from between 1840 and 1870. John Corey had that house from 1850 or 52 to 74. He was unmarried, he had no children, and his mother lived with him, had lived with him. And then he moved to a hotel when he sold his business. And he sold the house to William Sanborn, who was married with 2 children. I think Sanborn, did I say that here? I think Sanborn threw all the stuff in the privy after he bought the place, and he built a new privy closer, either inside the house or on the back of the house, but closer to the house, because the date corresponded to Corey. But Sanborn had 2 children, Corey didn't, and we have some child's stuff, the marble and the cup and the writing slates and stuff. So I think Sanborn filled it in, but most of the stuff was Corey's. Maybe his mother collected the bottles. But at any rate, when he moved to a hotel, he left a lot of stuff behind, and Sanborn just threw it out. And I think that's it. Any questions? Yeah?
Were there other places of repository where pieces of cutlery and ceramics were disposed of? I mean, why would they pick Privies?
Because it's a hole in the ground that you want to fill up. And just fill it up with you know, if you have stuff you want to throw out, throw it in the Privies.
Do you find pottery elsewhere?
Yeah. For example, at Fort Western, they just rebuilt a powder magazine. And it was first found in '83, and a small portion of it was excavated. I returned in '88 and excavated the whole thing, and it was 10 by 10. It had large sills on the bottom. In one corner, it had what I interpreted as a derrick or a crane, the base for a derrick or a crane. This is at the bottom of the 10 by 10. It had a large flat stone, and then sticking out from that corner, there was a chamber that went up where they could have had a derrick to swing out, pick up a barrel of powder and swing it back over and drop it in, or lower it in the magazine. And anyhow, in that 10 by 10, on the bottom was I think several hundred straight pens. And a lot of them had evidence that they were used as paper clips. They were bent in a certain way that suggested that. And then there was a lot of pieces of ceramic, nothing like we've seen here, but nonetheless a lot of ceramic and more than they found anywhere else, and bigger pieces than they found anywhere else at Fort Halifax. In 1766, Fort Western was decommissioned, and Samuel Howard, the commander, bought the fort. And I think all those straight pens were from records of the fort that he threw into the powder magazine, and then cleaned out the rest of the fort and threw it in the powder magazine, into that hole in the ground. So there is another example of finding artifacts that way. Yeah.
You mentioned that the first privy was wood lined.
Yes.
Is that a common thing? Was that?
Yeah, it's not unusual. I found wood-lined cellars, and
Just to keep it from collapsing? Is it?
yeah, that all that soil was, like I had mentioned, was alluvial, it was all sand, so you wouldn't support itself otherwise. But the last one you saw was stone lined.
You spoke of complete things. Did you mean a whole, or that you could piece them together to make it complete?
At the Parrington House, a lot of them were complete, but some you had to piece together, and all the others, the other two sites, well, there were complete bottles at Brown Street.
But when you say complete, you mean that it wasn't in pieces?
Right, yeah.
Wow.
Or that it could have been in pieces, but we got all the pieces.
And where is all these treasures? Where are they?
Fort Halifax is at Fort Western. The director of Fort Western is trying to become a depository for the Kennebec. Twings Point is at Fort Western. Kushnak, which is a trading post in Augusta, is at Fort Western.
So they have a little museum?
No, they're in storage, but they're available to researchers. They do have a museum, and she is the director is trying to get a grant to digitize everything, all the artifacts, or all the significant artifacts. Fort Richmond is going to be at Fort Western when they get the money to finish Fort Richmond. So, and let's see, Brown Street is at the, as far as I know, is at the Maine Historical Society in Portland.
So there's nothing at the Augusta Museum?
Pardon?
At the museum at Augusta?
Not from these three sites, no. No.
And where is the prehistoric stuff? I know that's not your...
From Fort Western, Fort Halifax, it's all at Maine Historic Preservation until somebody writes it up. I think Art Speece had mentioned he might do that sometime, maybe after he retires. But that's where it is now.
Would you have found any of the Native American historical data at the various sites, like say Fort Popham or any of the other older locations along the rivers in the state? I'm trying to...
well, they did find...
Pemaquid has some very old sites out there.
I spent 2 weeks at Pemaquid last summer, and we found some prehistoric material. Found some pottery and some flakes. And we found a point, spear point.
What about up and down the Androscoggin River as well? Like Hampton Point and some of those, they claim that there are a lot of ancient Native American sites up there.
I know less about that because much of that work was done by Farmington up in the upper reaches of the Androscoggin. So unless they had historic material, I didn't review it.